Well, I appreciate the opportunity to come visit with you a little bit about some of the work we've been involved with around birth weight and piglet survival. We're going to focus on a couple projects, and because of limited time, and so we'll get right into it. This graph really is no surprise to any of you in the room. We know over time the geneticists have done a good job helping us get larger litter sizes, represented by the black line. Increases in total pigs born, increase in number of pigs born alive. That trend has been increasing. The dotted line here is the number of pigs weaned per litter. And you notice that line is increasing, but not quite at the same rate as it is for total born and live born. So basically the gap out here is a little wider than it is here. Basically that's attributed to an increase in pre-wean mortality. And so we know that as we increase litter size along the x-axis here, there's a tendency for a decline in average birth weight of piglets. And with that decline in average birth weight, we have an increase in the percentage of small pigs per litter. Small pigs being defined here as less than a kilo in birth weight. And so as a result of that lower birth weight, increased incidence of or prevalence of low birth weight pigs, there are several data sets in the literature that look at the relationship between birth weight and piglet survival. And as birth weight declines in this data set, pre-wean mortality, well actually this is mortality to market weight, increases up until birth weight declines to about 950 grams. And in this data set, mortality takes a steep increase and is dramatically poorer or higher mortality with those lower birth weight pigs. And so what's the reason for that? Well, maybe some discussion around intrauterine growth retardation, placental insufficiency. Piglets aren't getting enough nutrients across the whole litter. They're not as uniform as we'd like them to be. So those small birth weight pigs are compromised and have a challenge surviving postnatally. They may just be genetically small. There's a lot of literature around this topic, and it's one that to me is really quite exciting, thinking about how we might be able to manipulate or influence the intrauterine conditions such that we set up a pig for a lifetime of better performance. And if we think about reproducing females, set up performance of those females in for multiple years until those sows leave the breeding herd. The other interesting thing about this data set is several groups around the world have independently developed this kind of threshold idea. Felposh group reported that that number was about 1.1 kilograms, where they saw the break point, an increase in pre-wean mortality. Others are around 900, 950 grams. It's happened too many times in different groups and different settings for it not to have some validity in my mind. So how do we deal with this? Well, we could deal with it postnatally, use rescue decks, fostering practices, maybe some supplements that newborn piglet. You can come up with other ideas. That's the things that we've been doing for years and years, managing those small pigs. Maybe management of that small pig is just euthanasia. Sacrifice that pig because the chances are it's either not going to make it or it's going to be a drag on the system the whole way through, so let's just euthanize him at birth. Certainly that's a waste, a lot of nutrients investment in that piglet to get it to birth weight, and that's an economic and efficiency loss. And if we think about environmental influences, makes the carbon footprint of pork production even worse. We could think about prenatal approaches, and this is the one that kind of excites me, is there things that we can do with a sow, treat one sow, but we're actually influencing 10, 12, 15 piglets in utero and set them up for a lifetime performance. Seems like an efficient way to try to influence the performance of those pigs. We can do that for nutritional adjustments, environmental controls maybe. When you think about that, if we have a pig that we're going to market at about 170 days, pick your number, and we think of that pig was in utero for about 115, 116 days, so if you go from the day the pig was conceived until it's marketed, 40% of that time is in the uterus. So it seems to only make sense to try to pay attention to that period of time to set that pig up and influence lifetime performance. Another approach is to build a better sow. And I know that there are genetic companies working on this, trying to develop a sow that can have larger litters, have more robust pigs, have more uniformity of pigs. That will take some time. I'm confident they'll get there. But in the interim, we still have to deal with the problem, the challenges. So I think for today's presentation, we're going to talk about, focus on the prenatal approach. So as you look at the literature, as I was reading, and there's lots of stuff, and it's kind of exciting to read all the different ideas. This is just a partial list of the things that I came across. And they're listed in alphabetical order. Down this side, over to Zinc is cost them as nutritional interventions. This last couple here, some management things. I'm not going to talk anything about management stuff. Dr. Ellis is here at the conference. He's going to talk about some of these things. I have a couple here in red. Hydroxymethylbutyrate, or HMB, is an area that we've put a little bit of time and effort in. I don't have time to talk about that here today, but Anna Clark, one of our recent master's students, did a project in a mouse model trying to look at HMB's role in influence on birth weight of rat pups and, mouse pups. They're a whole lot cheaper and quicker than sows, I'll tell you. If we want to talk about that, we can visit about that later. Zinc, we've done some work in zinc, and that's where I want to focus some of my comments here today, and talk a little bit about the zinc project. A couple of years ago, we were sitting around talking about how do we influence this pig in utero, what kind of things might we do to influence fetal programming, birth weight, and lifetime performance of the pig. And when we did that, we came across these data from the Clay Center group, Jeff Valet's group. And what they did is they took gilts and bred gilts and fed them either a corn-soy diet that was supplemented with 150 parts per million of zinc, supplied by zinc sulfate. And their treatment group was basically the same diet, supplemented with 430 parts per million of zinc from zinc sulfate, and looked at the relationship of birth weight to pre-weaning mortality. This graph just jumped out at us. We thought it was really important to note that as birth weight declined, this control diet, pre-wean mortality went up to nearly 100%, which is kind of what some of the other data suggest. But these gilts that got the high level of zinc, pre-wean mortality was only 40% in those low birth weight pigs. So I was like, well, what's happening? Why would that be? And we visit with the group a little bit. They said, yeah, we're not sure. We thought we'd try to follow up on it, never took time to do that. And so we thought that was right for some follow-up work. So with that project, with that in mind, we designed a study with the hypothesis that the pre-weaning survival will improve in these low birth weight pigs when they're fed high dietary zinc. And our objective was to look at pre-weaning survival of low birth weight pigs, is where we're primarily focused, and measure lifetime performance of those pigs. So the study that we designed basically was on a commercial farm. Appreciate Mark Schwartz and the Schwartz group for helping us on this project. Sows were individually stalled, typical stall gestation system. 3 weeks of production, 3 production weeks we took and put onto the study in last summer. Had about 115 sows per treatment, 4,500 piglets total in the experiment. We started with our dietary treatments on day 75 of gestation through Farrowing, which matched the Clay Center data. They imposed their treatments at about day 80 of gestation. Of course, they had to have limited access to water. And sows were offered 4.8 pounds of feed per day in this system. So our treatments, basically there was their corn soy, their controlled diet that had 125 parts per million of supplemental zinc. 75 parts per million of that was from zinc sulfate, 50 parts per million from an amino acid complex, Avela-Zinc, Zimpro's product. To that, we added 240 parts per million of zinc from zinc sulfate to give us our intermediate level of 365 ppm supplemental zinc. And we chose zinc sulfate because that's what the Clay Center group used. We wanted to try to replicate it as close as we could. And then we added another treatment. We added 470 parts per million to give us 595 parts per million supplemental zinc in our high treatment. Treatments, as I said, were imposed in day 75 gestation through farrowing. And we added the zinc to a Topdress. It was a stalled system, so we made up a Topdress, primarily corn, some grease to keep things together, zinc sulfite monohydrate, and that Topdress analyzed at over 11,000 parts per million of zinc. The intermediate treatment, they got 45 grams of that Topdress, and the high treatment, they got 90 grams of the Topdress. Controls got no Topdress, there was no placebo. So if we look down here in the bottom, the calculated zinc concentration of these treatments, and then the total daily zinc intake across the three treatments. We looked at sow performance, body condition, lameness, farrowing performance, piglets. Every piglet was weighed within 24 hours of birth, ear tagged so we could follow that pig throughout the system, got a weaning weight on those pigs, and then followed pre-wean mortality, and the farm identified cause and the body weight of those pigs at death. So looking at some of the data, first of all looking at farrowing performance, we see here the gray bar is total pigs born live, or total pigs born. No significant effect of dietary treatment across the x-axis on total born live, or pigs weaned. So imposing the treatments at day 75 gestation did not affect litter size. It didn't affect any of the sow condition, sow lameness. No effect on stillborn rate or the prevalence of mummies in the litters. The Clay Center data, when they looked at stillbirth rate, they did see a decline in stillbirth rate when farrowing intervals got to be much longer, but not in the overall stillborn rate. So we didn't really expect to see a difference in stillbirths, but we had that data recorded. The prevalence of small pigs, and small pigs here were defined as pigs less than a kilogram of body weight. This is total number of low birth weight pigs across treatments, normal birth weight pigs in total. And you see here that we had a significant decline in the prevalence of low birth weight pigs with the intermediate zinc treatment. And basically this result is the average birth weight of the intermediate pigs was about 40 grams heavier than the control. And the high birth weight pigs, or the high treatment, excuse me, those pigs were about 20 grams heavier than control pigs. So what did that mean for piglet survival? The overall piglet survival across all weight categories had a tendency for an improvement in survival or decrease in mortality from 15% in the control down to 12.2% in the high zinc diet. But more importantly, when we look at the low birth weight pigs, pigs that were weighed less than a kilo at birth, we see a decline of 38% in the control down to 28% pre-wean mortality in the high zinc treatment. And that was statistically significant. No effect for those, call them average, middle birth weight pigs due to zinc treatment. But surprisingly, for those heavier pigs at birth, we also saw a tendency for a decline in pre-wean mortality. That kind of surprised us. We didn't really expect to see an effect at that weight, but the data are there, and we're not sure exactly why that happened. So, a little bit in terms of economics, and this is my swine nutritionist economic analysis. So if there's any ag economists in the room, I apologize. But basically, our group here, Jay and some helped work on this. The assumptions we made was that we had a litter size born of 14, put a wean pig price in at $22.50, zinc sulfate price at 70 cents a pound. We assumed that you were not going to use a Topdress in a commercial setting, so we didn't put any labor in. You can figure out how you're going to get it to the sows. But basically, across these three treatments, sows consumed about 31, 53, and 73 grams of zinc across the whole gestation. And those costs for those zinc is depicted here. These are the mortality figures from the last graph for the overall mortality in the study. So with 15% mortality and 14 pigs born live, that weans you about 11.9 pigs. And at the wean pig price, the gross income minus the cost of the zinc, $267. You can go through the math. We're going to increase number of pigs weaned with lower mortality. Out here in the end, you've got about $5.60 or $8.75 additional income per litter for use of that zinc. The other thing to think about here as we think about adding zinc is what's the environmental impacts of such a high zinc supplementation rate. If we did a little math, Julia Holland did this work, and one of her other studies was to look at digestibility of zinc sources in sows. I'll tell you, it was a difficult study to do, and the data is a little messy. But taking some of her figures and trying to calculate estimated slurry production from sows and that, bottom line is I calculated that extra zinc on the high dose would pretty much double the zinc concentration in the slurry. So you can say, well, that's a problem. But also here, when I listen to the Linder Farm Network and the Hefty Seed Boys, they talk about zinc fertilization of corn to increase production. So maybe it's not that bad. I don't know. But something to consider. So we save more pigs. We wean more pigs with the zinc. But what good does that do us if those pigs are a drag on the system clear out to slaughter? So we followed 15 litters of pigs per treatment from weaning. They were selected at weaning. We followed them clear to harvest. We had about, per treatment, about 40 low birth weight pigs, about 100 medium and heavyweight pigs. We had mortality records throughout the nursery and finishing. Pigs were harvested at JBS. We got carcass data on them, calculated lean percent, fat-free lean, lean gain, so forth. First thing to tell you is mortality post-weaning was not different across the three dietary treatments or any interactions between birth weight class and dietary treatments. The mortality ranged from about 3% to 14%, and there wasn't any statistical significance of birth weight class or dietary treatment. If we look at the effect on post-weaning lean gain, we see that there was no statistically significant difference in overall. And if we look at each weight class, the light pigs, the medium pigs, and the heavyweight pigs, dietary zinc treatment to the sow did not influence post-weaning lean gain in this set of pigs that we followed. Maybe you can see we didn't compare it statistically, but if I use my ocular statistics, it looks to me like maybe there was some influence on birth weight and lean gain, but it wasn't huge. And so our take home was that we saved more pigs, and in this set they were not a drag on the system. They were quality pigs. So what are the practical applications Well, what about the timing of zinc supplementation? We went from day 75 to farrowing. When some of these data came out, farmers said, well, can I put zinc in the whole time? Well, we don't know. It'll be easier, but we don't know. Could we do it just at the very end of gestation? Put it real high? We don't know. We didn't study that. What about the dose? We used 365 and 595 parts per million zinc. Is that magical? We haven't studied that. Can I use zinc oxide versus zinc sulfate or zinc complex? Again, we're assuming that it's the zinc response, but we don't know that for certain, so we have to sort that out. What's the mechanism of action is the obvious question, right? Well, is it influence on placental sufficiency? You get a little burst of placental growth late in gestation in the pig. Something happening there. What about the zinc status of newborn? It would have been really cool to bleed a bunch of pigs, get tissue samples. We really talked about doing that and said, well, what sense does that make to do all that, spend the money, do the work, and you can't repeat the mortality responses. So we opted not to do that. We have plans now to further this work and look at some things like that. Microbiome influences. Is there something happening in the sow and the transfer and establishment of the microbiome of the piglet that makes that piglet more robust? Did we change the zinc status of the sow? Obviously, tons of questions that will probably keep me busy if we can get them funded through till I retire. But exciting things, and things that seem like there might be some mechanisms to learn there. So as we follow that, the other thing we wanted to think about was early life. Just switching from zinc to, not all the pigs are dragging the system. Sometimes pigs, these low birth weight pigs, they will compensate. Can you predict that early in life? So we know that birth weight is important to lifetime performance. We know that weaning weight, in some groups, they say that weaning weight is more important than birth weight. And I say weaning weight is a proxy for growth rate during lactation. And the question is, can low birth weight pigs compensate with optimized early life growth? So with the help of the Top Pigs Norseman folks, we got a data set from the Shorst Feed Research Farm. We had 536 litters over 12 months. Individual birth weights on 7,600 pigs, followed them through. Of course, the numbers drop off, but we've tracked pigs the whole way through their system to harvest. First thing we looked at was prewean mortality related to birth weight. This looks familiar, right? Birth weight declines. In our data set, right about 1 kilogram, that thing spikes, goes north, increases prewean mortality dramatically at 1 kilogram birth weight. Fits other data sets that we see in the literature. Of those pigs that died, 54% of them were less than 1 kilogram birth weight, and you can see the other breakout. So reinforces that those low birth weight pigs are a challenge in terms of keeping them going. Then we looked at what did suckling performance, how did that relate to birth weight? So the average suckling growth rate of the piglets in this data set was 225 grams per day. And so we split the data set into fast-growing pigs during suckling and slow-growing pigs, so above or below 225 grams. The black line is the fast pigs. So if we look at the slope of that, the response variable here is adjusted finishing weight, adjusted to 167 days. And we see that as birth weight increases, finish weight increases for the fast-growing pigs. But for the slow-growing pigs, birth weight has a bigger effect. Increasing birth weight has a bigger effect on the slaughter weight or the final finished weight. So it suggests to us that birth weight is important, and so is suckling growth rate. Early life growth is important. I had an old-timer tell me once that a pig never gets over a good start, right? So if we can get him started good in lactation, that sets the stage for good lifetime performance. Look at nursery performance, same concept, except the fast-growing pigs were pigs that grew greater than 424 grams per day. slow-growing pigs less than that. And we see these lines pretty much parallel. So whether you're fast-growing in nursery or slow-growing, in this data set, birth weight had about the same influence. Increasing birth weight increased the finished weight. So, conclusions. I'm running out of time. In utero, pig performance needs more attention in our swine systems. It's just exciting to me that we can think about feeding that pig in the uterus and influence things that's going to be manifested months later and maybe even years later. Pig birth weight plays an important role in lifetime performance. So does early life growth. And that may, in some instances, be able to mitigate some of the detriments created by low birth weight. And at least in a couple data sets now, it seems like there might be something to this zinc story and something that we're intent on trying to pursue a little further and try to understand how and why and how broadly that might be applicable. So with that, I acknowledge a bunch of students here. Julia Holland, that was her zinc master's work. Jikai did the top pigs Norsman analysis. Jay Chol, Jang did some of the economics and helped us with the zinc. Of course, Jerry Shearson and Pedro involved. Really appreciate Schwartz Farms and the top pig Norsman folks for sharing their data with us and funding from Pork Board and Chekhov.